Hi, Tamara. Thanks for joining today.
Hello, Christine. I've been looking forward to this for a long time.
I have too. You are a luminary in the product field, the UX space, and I've followed your work for now 20 plus years. I always knew your name and your reputation and your work. I first really got to know your work around personas back around the 2007, 2008 timeframe. And it's because I was based in Boston. I was moving to the West Coast and I was starting to go on my own as a consultant. And I was wondering at this inflection point, how do I even get started? Who's a powerhouse in the field I could turn to learn more from? So I bought your book, the Persona Lifecycle book. And from that day forward, as I was reading through, I've just been such a fan of yours. So I can't tell you, I'm so happy to have you on today. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate it. And in the spirit of radical transparency and aging women in tech, I come on podcasts and I get these incredible introductions from powerful and impressive women like you. And what's going on in my head is something totally different, which is that I used to have a reputation in product. And there are some people who think of me that way. And then there is me as someone who's been consulting independently in a different world for many years. And there's plenty of people who have no idea
Yeah.
who the hell I am. And that's much more my reality. And my ego takes a hit with that. And it's a struggle. And I just want people to know that after a while, it's pretty easy to look like you're rocking it. And that can be super intimidating to people who feel like they aren't. But the people who look like they're rocking it aren't necessarily rocking it all the time. So I just thought I'd start off with radical freaking transparency. Tell you, I really love hearing that. But sometimes
Mhm.
that's also weird to hear because when I have my struggles, I'm like, these two things don't match. Some people say, oh, you're awesome. And then I can't get work for a few months.
Yeah. Thank you for
So,
sharing, Tamara. I'm curious what your take has been too. I appreciate the transparency. I am guilty of this. I've heard this from other folks I've talked to. We put on this, I don't want to say it's a facade, but sometimes it's a screen to say, yeah, everything's fantastic. We're just powerhouses, just rocking it in with our business. I'm curious what you've been finding over the last year. It's been a messy time in the tech world and the consulting world. I'm finding the more that I do open up and talk about the mess, I'm actually connecting in a different way with colleagues and folks I've known for years and years. And I'm curious, it's still scary opening up, but are you finding a different level of connection when you're sharing the messiness of your story?
yeah, it feels more realistic to me. And it also keeps that voice in my head from denigrating all the nice things that you just said. And also, I just try to do what I wish kind of other people would do. I'll share stuff specifically about money and fees that I charge or ways that I set up structures with customers or whatever. And I often want to hear what's really going on with people because it's such an uncanny valley to walk through and talk to people or listen to podcasts of all these great luminaries until you know that it's not like that in
Mhm.
their balance sheets. It's just not. I think we can also, for me anyway, I have a tendency to blame myself if I'm not doing enough marketing or I'm not doing whatever. And I know that's not right, but I don't give myself the kind of grace that I would give other people. To me, that's the path of opening up about that stuff and talking about the real stuff is the path to, if people do value an authentic voice, that's authentically what's going
Yeah.
on.
You were speaking to when people are saying positive things about you and describing you as a luminary. Sometimes it doesn't resonate to the degree you want. When you said that, and I'm be curious if this is a female issue or what sort of, I don't want to stereotype, but when you were saying that, what came up in my mind about a week and a half ago, a woman in tech, a senior woman in tech, reached out to me to share how I had impacted her life and career in a positive way. And she shared how these conversations with women are really resonating with her. It took me until this morning to respond to her. It was this positive feedback. And I'd be curious your take. I was trying to understand why it took so long. It's much easier for me to be down on myself and hard on myself and focusing on not what's not working versus acknowledging when I get positive feedback. And I hear this more from women than my male colleagues. I'm curious, do you have any thoughts or reactions there?
Oh yeah. I don't know, men, whatever. I don't know what they go through. The ones I'm closest to don't behave like typical men in tech, but
Men, whatever.
I don't know. I don't know. It's a mystery, black box. But here's what I can say, and I'll also just be radically transparent about this. After a million years in therapy, because I think a lot of people who listen, I know I'm smart. I know I have an interesting perspective. I know I can be funny. I know a lot of good things about myself, right? But I also know that with that, for many people, comes some real struggles and some real self-attacks. And I also realized through my own sort of therapy a long time ago that I ascribe to the negative voice in my head the smartest part of myself. So that whenever I hear my head tell myself something negative about me, I'm like, that's the smartest part of myself. They're always right. That voice is always correct. It's just not always helpful. It's correct that there's a huge amount of suffering in the world and there's nothing I can do about it. That's not a helpful point when I'm trying to like write an email. It's just, but it's always true. So I think these voices that we set up and we hear, and as women, I guess in particular, there's a Harvard study where it said that it was years ago, if a man sees a job description with 20 bullet points and does qualify for one of them, he will apply. If a woman sees 20 bullet points and does not for one, so she does for 19, she qualifies for 19, does not for one, she won't apply. So there's something in the wiring, there's something about us holding ourselves to some truth standard, and that's may not even be a useful truth standard.
I think there's a real opportunity for me to learn and other women to learn from your experience. So with that, if you're comfortable with it, I'd love to hear a bit of your story, your career trajectory, and anything you'd like to share about your life trajectory that's led to here, and then we can go from there.
Sure. And given the way that we started this conversation, I guess I'll include some things that I don't usually include when I rattle it off. When I came up, so I graduated from college in 1986. I did an independent major at Vassar, and I did a combined art and psychology and cognitive science, all the stuff that sounds really interesting and cool, like to figure out how does art inform how we understand the way visual perception works, which all sounds very fancy and cool, except an undergraduate has no business research any of that stuff. Graduated, had no idea what to do, canvassed for environmental group, which I hated for 3 years, accidentally knocked on the door of a guy in a cul-de-sac one evening who happened to be the person who brought human factors engineering into Army research. And by the way, this gal would have been like the least likely person ever to work for the military industrial complex. But we got to talking because his wife was out playing pinochle. And I ended up getting hired at the Army Research Lab, the Human Engineering Laboratory of Hell, and working there for 3 years and discovering human computer interaction and this was from 1989 to around 1992, 93, and then came out to Seattle for a conference, talked to the people at the University of Washington in industrial engineering. They said, you're one of those weird technical communications people. I went over there. They said, you're one of us. I got into the grad program and then stayed out in Seattle, got my grad degree in 96, and then worked with startups and then worked with Amazon, and then went back out on my own in 2005. And here I am today. And in the middle of that, also ended up writing the Persona Lifecycle books with my dear friend and colleague, John Pruitt, and Holly Jameson Carr, who went on to do environmental building consulting a long time ago. And I think part of where this interest in human computer interaction came from is my own sort of makeup, where my dad was an artist, my mom was interested in psychology, and I think in a way this is it's being diplomatic and being interested perhaps in both things. I don't know. But this field didn't exist when I started. It didn't exist even more for the bunch of people that came right before me. In fact, in the early 2000s, I did a bunch of interviews called UX Pioneers, which I have to get back up, which were all the people who helped start the field. And how do you start a field out of the clear blue sky? So that kind of thing has always been interesting to me. And I just went from there. And I think I chose consulting partially because I think what really interests me is how do you get people talking to each other and working together when they haven't been able to on their own? And it's very clear very quickly that doing that from the outside makes a lot more sense than doing that from the inside, because the second you join an organization, you're part of the problem. And where I am today is For most of my consulting career, in 2005, I left Amazon to start consulting. I had a bunch of friends who had gone to other big companies and got me gigs. In 2008, I co-founded an agency, very quickly realized that was not for me, and left after a massive work divorce with the person I partnered with. Decided to be independent and was cooking along until, this sort of weird mid-career crisis that started happening a few years ago, where the work wasn't coming fast and furious, where I didn't walk into a room and immediately people would say, thank God you're here. They would say that I'm slowing them down, or I'm irritating the team, or I'm frustrating them for saying some really basic stuff. And I didn't know how to handle it. I think we look forward in our career, we think, certainly as women, like I would look forward and say, oh, those men and their midlife crisis, or with their like Camaro or whatever. Now I'm showing my age of Camaro or Porsche. But you get to this age, you get to this, at least in career, and there is a reckoning that you don't see coming that has to do with suddenly not being who you were professionally and not knowing who you are now. And having to choose, am I going to battle the old battles that I battled, buy the Porsche and try to attract the 18-year-old co-ed? That's an analogy, not a literal. Or am I going to do something else? And if I'm going to do something else, what the hell is it? That's the journey so far. I'm working on another book, which I've been telling myself to do for 10 years. I launched my own podcast, which I've been telling myself to do for 10 years. I'm just trying to get out of my own way for the umpteenth time in my professional life.
Thank you. Thank you. Tamara, I have so many questions for you. I
So do
wanted
I.
to start when you're talking, I'm going, because so much resonates. I wonder, where do you feel right now in this stage? I've been describing, I feel like I'm in this messy middle. So when you were describing the stage of who you were and the identity you were and what worked well in the past versus where you want to get to, I'm still flat in the middle, this messy period. And I'm curious, do you feel like you've gotten to the other side at this point, or are you still in the messiness?
No, I'm still in the messy middle. I won't get to the other side until I'm actually making money doing something that's fun. There is no other side that you can get to by yourself. Wise. There is personally, I assume. Work-wise, until I've established an income stream that is tied to me doing something fun and not feeling like I'm not making enough or not getting enough recognition or whatever those ego things are, I won't be to the end of it. I don't know if I'll ever be to the end of it. I don't know. I don't know. I look at people who I know around me there's so many people around me who made $1 gazillion because we started early at things. I am not one of those people. And I wonder maybe they feel that way. Maybe they've gone on to be philanthropists. I don't know when you get to the other side of that.
Yeah.
But for me, because I can't not work financially until I get to a point where it's running smoothly from a business perspective and mortgage and funny food and shoes, whatever, I won't be to the other side of that.
You said it took about 10 years to get your podcast out there, and there's all of these actions you're taking now. I'm wondering, is this messy middle prompting those actions, or what's led you to start trying these new different things that have been on your roadmap for 10 years? What's led to that now? Is it the pain?
Rage.
Yeah, I hear you.
Rage and frustration. Part of it is I cannot listen to myself at another dinner with some of my favorite colleagues talk about how I should be doing this. I just irritate the living shit out of myself. And also just trying to listen to my own advice, like it doesn't have to be perfect, and just unplugging, just taking the cork out. I've been so corked, and I just corked myself up that with the book, what untangled me was AI being able to handle a bunch of my messy drafts. With the corporate underpants thing, I don't know, I just decided what unplugged me with the corporate underpants, which is the podcast show thing, is that the universe and my dear friend Phil a couple of years ago asked me to be the host of the Never Search Alone LinkedIn Lives, which get hundreds of people learning about this free job search support network. Part of me is I am a professional performer in some ways. I perform, not like I'm a stand-up comic, but as a professional person, some of what I do is perform. It's like a UX comedy hour, whatever it is. And I really like being live. And that gave me some of that, gave me a taste of that, and gave me actually literally the tools. I'm like, okay, now I know to use StreamYard and then put them at LinkedIn Live. And literally sometimes it's the tools that are so overwhelming and the research to do the basics that kept me from doing some of these
That
things. I
makes a
get
lot of
wrapped around my
sense.
own axle, like thinking, maybe I should blog instead. And if I blog, should I put it on Medium or Substack? I would drive myself crazy. And also, the other rage part is that I've been thinking about alignment, executive alignment, and alignment of stakeholders for a long time. And suddenly it's coming up in the field. This is a good thing for me. My initial reaction to it was not, this is a good thing for me. Luckily, getting past that is something that's within my power to do. So, some of it's external, some of it's internal, some of it's just getting sick of hearing myself talk
Yep.
about not doing it.
Yep. Thanks, Tamara.
Why did you start this?
I was feeling a lot of pain. I also felt like you that I disappeared for a long while in the industry. There was a period where people knew my name. I'd go to New Zealand or Singapore and speak on topics, and people wanted to hear from me. And the CPOs would say, Christine, like you were saying, Tamara, Christine, please come in and help us. That stopped. And part of it was my doing, part of it was what's happening in the industry. My story was I chose to have a baby and a baby on my own. And I took a step back from being out at conferences, speaking, putting myself out there. I still was finding work, but with the market struggling over the last year and a half, it's been messy for me. So, why I started this group, Lift Up, it happened organically. I started coming out again on LinkedIn, on social media. I was presenting with the goal of getting chief product officers excited about my message. They were not excited about my message when I started putting myself out there. Wasn't hearing anything, wasn't getting projects. Who was excited about my message is a bunch of women in this industry, product and UX, started reaching out to me saying, Christine, so glad to see you out here again. I want to be out here more. They could sense my struggles and they didn't disappear. They embraced me. And I started this group and Lift Up because a bunch of women like me were feeling the same messiness. And initially I was resisting this. I'm like, nope, chief product officers, they're going to be excited about what I'm doing. They're not. And it's tough to embrace that. But when you're talking about the messy middle, I think of myself as the UX product leader who's going to do this work, transform organizations. That's what I've done for 25 years. And it's a radical shift to say, okay, that's not the next chapter for me. And I've been struggling with it. And there's been a lot of grief around it where it's this uncertain future. I know what audience cares about my message, but it's very scary. And there's a lot of grief
Totally scary. And I
associated.
want to say something else too, which first of all, I'm glad. And at some point, you should have me be on as a host of your one episode where I interview you, because I don't know that everybody who listens to you knows
Oh,
your full story. And I
no.
think all of us should do that. If we have a podcast, have somebody else come on and interview us. The other thing that happens when people hit what you call the messy middle, also there's books I have very mixed feelings about all of these, especially male authors out there. Chip Conley has a concept of modern elders and the mid-career crisis, and modern elder just sticks in my craw. But his concept is that you hit a moment in your professional life where you go from knowledge worker to wisdom worker, which is all well and good if you can suddenly get an amazing contract with Airbnb's CEO like he did, which
Yeah.
no one can. But that's also the messy middle part. But the other thing that I want to say is the other way that people handle this messy middle and are handling it right now is everybody's becoming a career coach and trying to sell to fear. The difference with what you're doing is that you found what people needed first and then started supplying something that you could offer of value, which that's where people can offer, and it is worth paying for. It is helping people. It is, but that's also a weird place to be and I put up a page that says I'm
Yeah.
a career coach. Everybody does that, but it's a weird position to be in. You absolutely are offering something that's worth it. But it's such a weird time right now when nobody's working. It's weird to offer something of value to people that you really care about. I like that you put together something to fill a need as opposed to just saying, I have extra hours on my calendar, people can buy them.
Yeah, Tamara, you and Phil And the Never Search Alone community is what inspired a lot of this new direction for my connection councils for women. And I'd love to talk about Never Search Alone because the community and connection that this group has offered people during some of the most challenging periods, probably the most challenging period in their lives and careers. Never Search Alone was the first. I know Phil and you have been doing this forever with the council format, but it's the first time I heard from so many people how the power of connection with 5 or 6 other people trying to solve a challenge together led to community, connection, and success for many of these people landing their next job. It was the Never Search Alone model that I was following when I thought about these connection councils for women. So thank you and thank Phil for all
Oh,
of the work you've done here.
it's definitely thank Phil. So Phil is the one who's been doing community councils for a really long time. Phil does that professionally with the collaborative gain councils. Companies
Mhm.
need to send their senior executives to these non-competitive councils where they can actually talk about stuff like we're talking about now without feeling like we're not allowed to talk about this. Then Phil was working on this book for 10 years. And Phil and I were friends because I was on a collaborative gain council when I worked at Amazon. And then I couldn't be on it anymore when I left Amazon because there's no consultants on the councils. I totally understand. And then I was doing all this stuff where I was definitely a resource for women in careers. I wasn't charging money for it, but I was really fascinated about women in careers. I'd written some articles on it. I had coached a bunch of women. And then when I saw Never Search Alone come out, I volunteered to help launch this community. So what Never Search Alone does is it enables you to do these free job search councils and follow this 11-week program, which is, it's the best analogy is Alcoholics Anonymous or Narcotics Anonymous, although again, we're not affiliated with those, but it's a specific program that you go through with other people struggling with the same issue. What's missing from that is something that you're filling in a bit of the gap, which is a lot of times people need something more than that. And Phil's thinking about that and what additional resources Phil can offer and Never Search Alone can offer. But you're offering something that is a known need, which is a longer term, more extensive connection along a different axis than just job searching. Because in job search councils, you don't have to be in the same field, you don't have to be the same gender, the same age, nothing. You have to be about the same amount of experience working, a number of years, and a similar time zone to make it possible to meet. But what you're doing is putting together councils along a different axis that is longer term and valuable in an additional way.
That was also an organic process where we went through the pilot for the councils using the model of Never Search Alone. And the council member said, "Are we really stopping? Can we keep going?" Because there was so much support and connection and friendship. And for many of these women now in their 40s and 50s, friendship is hard to come by at certain points in life. So I think that's been really the magic behind this, just a level of connection the women have had.
And I hope you're also having exercises where everybody talks about money.
Can you let's talk about that, Tamara. I mentioned to you when you came on before we started recording that you and Kyle Susie were along for a walk that I was taking yesterday.
Here.
Excellent, excellent podcast, the UX Consultants Lounge. She had you on and she published the episode this week and it was fantastic. And you did start talking about the importance of women discussing money. And can you speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, for sure. First of all, it's just something that I wear on my sleeve because I have no idea how to deal with that stuff. So my response to not knowing how to deal with stuff is to just bring it to the surface. I don't know. But over the years, there have been conversations with lots of women that are close to me where one or the other of us was going through some money thing. At one point, it was me reacting to my ex-partner wanted to buy out the shares of the agency that we co-founded a year and a half later, whatever, and lowballed me. And it was my friend Sonia who coached me and said, nope, you got to add a couple zeros onto that. And you got to take your email response down from 6 paragraphs to 2 sentences. I literally showed her the dollar amounts and she literally told me dollar amounts to respond with. There have been other times where a dear friend of mine, I'll call her Sue, was looking at a full-time gig in a totally different non-tech venue and arena. And she talked about how she was getting offered $300,000 a year. I realized that I had to say out loud, oh my God, $300,000 a year? I'm freaking out because like all I could think about was myself and my response to that until, and I said this on Kyle's podcast, until I said out loud, oh my God, all I can think about is me in my conversation with. And then when I did say out loud, all I can think about is me, then that stopped being an issue. So I started to just take note of all these times that I really needed to talk about money with women and my own response or my own needs, and just tell people like, you have to figure out how to talk to your friends about money. And also realizing that not that long ago, there was this sort of rule that was imposed on everybody. You don't talk about your salary. And if you think about that, the only organization that benefits is the company. And yet we took it as if it was this ethical rule. It's not an ethical rule. It's a rule that benefits the company to not talk about your salary. So looking again at all of these things and figuring out how can I talk about money in a way where I can express my feelings about it, offer support, and get support in a non-sibling rivalry kind of way. And by the way, not all women are trustworthy either. So that's the other thing that I realized is that just because there's a senior woman somewhere in an organization doesn't mean that she's non-toxic. Especially even just a couple of years ago, like friends of mine would say, I'm so excited, my senior manager is a woman. And I'd be like, okay,
Let's
but
wait
let's
and
wait and
see.
see.
Yeah.
As the kind of games that all of us had to play to get to those senior levels sometimes decimated or indicated personality flaws that were deeper than that.
This isn't an easy question to answer, Tamara, in this market, but back to talking about money and the importance there. You're speaking to when you have those friends and confidants and people you trust who you can go to, there's a lot of discussion about talk about money so you can know your worth and you can ask for what you deserve. And I've been seeing in this messy market two lines of thought and I've been hearing this, that people who are in a position financially right now where they're okay, they could retire, they're still having the discussions about know your worth, don't take less than you should receive. There's a lot of people right now who are really scared and they're not in a position financially where they're thinking I can ask for top dollar and they're not quite sure what to do. And I'm curious, there aren't really any answers to that, but I've been hearing from people, yes, in concept, I want to ask for top top worth and money, but they're not in a position where they think they can do that in this market.
Okay,
I
well,
have a
hold on.
perspective. Yeah.
That has moved. That's the other thing. What you deserve is compared to what is
Yeah.
always what's missing in those conversations. Yes, if you are being hired as a senior muckety muck at Acme Incorporated, and there's a man, senior muckety muck at
Yeah.
Acme Incorporated, and you have the same level of experience, then you, yes, probably deserve the same pay brackets. But if that pay bracket has come down, if the market forces have changed, there is no deserve
Yeah.
in in the market. There is what it is. In capitalism, it is, and whatever fucking thing we're living in right now, it's what the market will bear. So I don't know that I see people who have been struggling to get an offer or something, and then they come back to the group that they've been talking to, and they're like, this isn't enough compared to what I would have made in this position 2 years ago. And I'm like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
haven't had an offer in how long? And now you're talking about how 225 isn't enough? You're crazy. So with women, what I think is always important is going to be title, always. And title doesn't necessarily cost the company anything, but title is what enables you to get your work done in the politics of an organization. So the biggest regret whenever I helped women think through jobs was that they didn't fight more for the title one level above what they took. One woman that a dear friend of mine, she went in as a senior director. She couldn't work because all the people who were cohorts were VPs and they wouldn't listen to her because of her title.
Yep.
Money aside, I think one of the great points Phil makes in Never Search Alone is that you have to negotiate for the things that are going to make you happy and successful in your job. Those things are resources, support, mentorism, access to information. It's not just salary and time off and title. For women, always title.
I'm wondering if you could go back now to the start of your career, given everything you've learned, what are two of the biggest lessons learned you'd have that you communicate back to that version of yourself?
There's only one piece of advice that's ever really stuck with me, and it had nothing to do with work. When I was out of college, I was really struggling, living at home and working for an environmental group, canvassing door to door. And this one friend of the family, who has nothing to do with technology at all, said to me, when you look back on this time, it's going to seem like nothing. So that really stuck with me and made so much sense. This is not as big a deal as you think it is. And when you look back on this time, it's just going to be a blip. That has helped me a lot. I still crashed and burned, and I'm still coming out of crashing and burning. The thing is, I don't know what I would have told myself. I don't think I would have told myself anything.
Yeah.
I made the choices that I did and enjoyed the projects that I had and coasted along. And I don't know that you can tell yourself that's anything that's going to help you avoid the messy middle of anything.
No, there would just be a different messy middle if you could go back and tell yourself how it ended up. Something else would happen along the line. It's a different
Something else would happen.
configuration. Absolutely. I was thinking about you've spoken a lot about your relationship with Phil. You met him quite a long time ago while you were at Amazon. I also have been really enjoying your new podcast. As you mentioned, Corporate Underpants. Your first episode was with I Am the Fangirl, but with Scott Birkin, who I know you've known for years and years. Why did you start the podcast and where would you like to take it?
When we wrote the books on personas, they're about data first personas, right? They're also about like, how do you prepare for it? How do you actually use them once you have them, whatever. And then I went out and consulted, never did them again, never really did data first again, and got again really fascinated in it's not about the data, it's about whether people are talking past each other. So I got really interested in alignment, started the ad hoc persona thing, which I was using as a consultant. I thought I'm using this ad hoc method because we don't have time to do full personas. And then I started embracing it more. And then I renamed it recently as alignment personas. And I have this process that I'm putting together in a book, which now I'm calling Align Before Design. Corporate underpants is a phrase that I used in a 2006 blog post about the visible panty lines of the software world. Like, what really gets in the way of us creating great products? It has nothing to do with the thing we think it has to do with. It usually has to do with the stuff nobody talks about, which is the CEO's nephew's cousin said something about Fortnite, and suddenly the next week you're working on the gamification of a banking system. Like, it's crazy shit like that I think we don't talk about it because we think we can't stop it. To me, the alignment stuff is the solution to a huge problem that not enough people talk about, which is the real and human and political issues that we think we can't fix in organizations. So we don't talk about them.
Yep.
And I was saying in the beginning of my career, I'm going to stay out of politics. I'm just going to do aligned work. You can't do that. So I thought about, people would always ask me, like, who are you talking to? Who's your audience for this? And I figured it out, and I wanted to use the Corporate Underpants name. And I don't really fully know what Corporate Underpants is going to be yet. What it is in my head at episode 4 is Corporate Underpants is the problem. The problem is the visible panty lines of your organizational structure show through on your product and ruin the experiences that you create, no matter how good you are at wireframing. Doesn't matter. Corporate underpants is the fact that data isn't as powerful as we think it is. Data doesn't change people's assumptions unless you know what they are. We all know this in our heart, refuse to admit it professionally. If data worked, people wouldn't get married because the data says it's not a great idea. Has for years. We joke about it. Why do people still get married? Because they think they're the exception, because they think their own love story is unique, because hope, all those things are powerful too. All they do is prove data doesn't always work. That fascinates me. And car crashes fascinate me. So I wanted to provide not just people talking about the right way to do things, but having done things the wrong way.
Yep.
because it fascinates me. Because when people call me, I end up talking to them about how two of their senior managers hate each other. And I love it. That's the real stuff. And so then I have this cute little jingle that says experience by osmosis. I'm like, maybe if you listen to enough stories of having things having gone completely fucking sideways, you could avoid it.
Yeah.
It's like learning the Heimlich maneuver. If you see someone administer it, it's not that you've been there when someone was choking on something, but it's almost like you were and you know what to do.
What really resonated, and your podcast is fantastic, Tamara. What resonated when you were speaking with Scott, it really does come down to the people and relationships and connections and how you're navigating the structures and organizational politics. And you and Scott so honed in on that. If I see one more process chart on LinkedIn about how we should be overseeing our product development or flow diagram, I'm going to scream
So that's the thing,
because it's
right? Yeah.
not about that. There's some brilliant product leaders who can speak all day about process, and I love them. But it's not about that. And it took me
That's their
so long
cotton
in my
stuff.
career. Yeah. And you're speaking to that. It is about the people.
It's okay. So the
Connection.
analogy we all use the house analogy, right? And the
Yeah.
process is about as if you're on a building site and you're using the double diamond. It all is about getting the
Hmm.
contractor there on time, updating the architectural drawings, maybe doing the electrical at the right time so you don't have to rip the siding off one more. All focused on optimize. Where I'm focused is the tornadoes.
Yep.
We focus on the double diamond, tweak, tweak, tweak. And we think that if we just keep focusing on optimizing the building of the house, that everything will go well, but it doesn't matter if there's a tornado. There is a different, exponentially different level of problem that we ignore because we feel like we can't change it.
Yep.
And so we just
Absolutely.
pretend it isn't there.
Yep. Absolutely, Tamara. I could talk to you all day long. There is another question I wanted to ask. I've been having an interesting experience in the messy middle, and I'm curious what you've been seeing. There's a lot of people who are there for you to lift you up when things are good. I've found that the colleagues and people in my career trajectory during this messy period, the people who have been there for me weren't necessarily the people that I predicted would be. And I'm curious, are you finding allies and people lifting you up during this period as well?
Have to be careful because it's a terrible analogy, but it's the drowning dog thing. If
Mm,
there's an animal drowning in the water and you get anywhere near it, they will scratch the living fuck out of you trying to save
mm,
themselves. And I
yeah,
think we can be the drowning dog when we are feeling this way. We are so desperate. When we reach out, we can accidentally clobber people. Or we can be so self-conscious about not clobbering them that we don't get the help we need. I think one of the genius things of Never Search Alone is that it requires and asks you and helps you get organized before you ask for help.
yeah,
I think
yeah,
when you're organized in the way that you ask for help, then it's a compliment to the person who's giving it to you. Everybody loves being a thought partner. Nobody loves hearing, help, help, I'm never going to work again. And I actually did this to Phil. I
yeah,
text Phil, not many people can. And at one point, on 7 o'clock my time, 10 o'clock Phil's time in New York, I wrote, I think I'm never going to get another job again. And afterwards I had to apologize. And Phil said, yeah, you really triggered a reaction in me too that panicked. And I'm like, I
yeah.
can't do that to people.
That's an excellent point, Tamara. Yeah,
I think people who've been in therapy know this, you know that you have to have different places you put different things. I think one of the reasons councils work so well is also they unburden your personal relationships a little bit.
hmm,
Your marital, if you have I don't, but if you have a marital, I talk to my bunny rabbits, they don't really have much good advice. It unburdens those because you have another place to put it. And
that's
also, like I told you in the beginning, complaining about not doing this podcast to my friends, I couldn't listen to myself do it anymore.
yeah.
I was irritating myself so much that I just couldn't do it.
It's interesting what you were saying about the connection councils for the women's council. Same thing, Tamara. One of the powers is having an hour and a half consistently where you can go into a safe environment and talk about the mess and what's going on and not burden everyone outside of that safe environment. And it's a huge benefit for, and I'm sure that's the same for the Never Search Alone councils, just having that safe space to work through the mess together.
Yeah, 100%. Like
Yeah,
Phil said, it's one of the biggest hacks in human psychology is you put people together in a room who are struggling with the same problem. They start to help each other.
yeah.
There is no, I am not saying that you can't be scrabbling and frantic. I'm just saying that the place that you do that and the people you do that with are different, perhaps, than the people you have in your professional network who really can help you with more practical stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And that you think about the kind of help you're asking for. Also, there's an analogy that I use with women. I learned a long time ago not to say I feel fat in front of my friends. And it's not because of fat phobia and it's not because of body shaming. It's because it never made me feel better. If I said I was feeling fat, if I felt fat, they would inevitably say, no, you look great.
Yeah.
I don't know what you're talking about, which would make me feel worse because I knew that either they were lying to me or they weren't. It just never made me feel better. And so I would
Mm-hmm.
have to think about, don't say it because you're not going to feel better. I think that sometimes I think about the same things when I'm asking for help with work. Is there anything they can say if I say these words that's going to make me feel better? In a council, yes, they'll say I feel the same way. In a networking call over coffee,
Tamara, I've been having similar conversations with other women in tech. A couple of conversations I'd had recently with UX leaders. Some patterns are coming out of these conversations. I recently spoke with Susan Rice, who was a UX leader at Toast for a while, Workiva, Jen McGinn, who's a VP executive in the UX space, and they've talked about when I asked about their career trajectory, they talked a lot about the importance of mentors and role models along the way and people they were learning from in their career. When you look back on your career now, are there people that really come to mind that helped guide your career along the way? And if so, who were they?
there are, and there's also friends who have been
Yeah.
there and who pick me up so much even now. Like there's a group of us that we jokingly call the gentle persons of UX that gets together every month or so. Andy Fitzgerald, Mark Weeman, Corinne Sherry, Joe Shoup. These are senior level people in my field and in my network. And we get together and have cocktails and I don't know, vegan Mexican food. And they're always just so supportive just by being there. In terms of mentors, though, when I was younger, first started at NetPodium, one of my first jobs out of grad school, I had a boss named Dan Gallivan, who was just so generous and supportive and gave me The Inmates Are the Running the Asylum book by Alan Cooper, and once told me of myself, I was getting this position. I mean, it was a startup, so I got this position as head of UX. It didn't really mean anything. But Dan said, there are people who will do it differently than you, but there's nobody who's going to do it better than you. That has held me through so many things. And I've told so many other women that. Also, Larry Tesler, who is one of the most amazing people in tech. You guys should look him up if you don't know who he is. He did the initial user test on the mouse, was my boss at Amazon, and was such a natural tech feminist who surrounded himself with, turns out to be like loud, bossy Jewish women in UX and a few great men, right? That was just so naturally supportive. I think people who are secure in themselves enough to lift you up without feeling like it's trampling them. And I try to do that too with that model, that it's not about me, it's about lifting them up. And it makes me feel good too.
Tamara, thank you so much for the time today. I had one more question for you if you have time. I so appreciate your authenticity and vulnerability and sharing your story. We've talked a lot about many women feeling like they're in that messy middle, and a lot of us are, not just women. Any words of advice when you're in that uncertain period, not knowing what's next? What I've said to a lot of these women is keep taking the actions and see where it takes you. I'm curious, any words of advice to lift up the women in my audience still uncertain about what's next?
It's just really hard. And no one thing that you're going to do is going to do it or make you feel better. And if you're anything like me, then sometimes you take a step and some internal force whacks you back 30 feet. And I'm on a couch for a day and a half.
Yep.
So if you see people who look shiny and perfect, bull fucking shit. Just know that. And I don't know. Sometimes I just have to wait for tomorrow to have a little more energy. That's what I mean. That's the real story of my life, of my own mental health struggles, my own career struggles. Sometimes I just have to wait for tomorrow and see where my energy is. Oh, and no
I
thinking after 9 p.m. That's the other rule. If you are thinking about something important and you look at the clock and it's 9 p.m., stop. You're not allowed to think after 9 p.m.
I'm guilty. Why?
because it's never going to help.
Yeah.
Because something that's going to take you 2 hours to work through tonight will take you 15 minutes tomorrow morning. And you're not allowed to think after 9. I'm sorry.
So I put nuggets of wisdom from the women who I talked to. That's going to be the headline tomorrow.
I'm telling you, this is one of the most valuable things I've learned.
With that, Tamara, thank you so much for the conversation. I so enjoyed it.
Oh gosh, I have no idea what I just said. So this is an unusual conversation. Thank you for opening up the space for that. Ugh, it feels weird, but thank you.